He is one of Hollywood's most successful directors, but Jim Abrams will tell you his filmmaking is not his greatest success. He is far prouder of how he helped his son overcome a devastating disease. After trying just about everything, this devoted father discovered a treatment that transformed not just his son's life, but the lives of thousands of other children as well. It's a story as dramatic as any movie, and as you're about to see, one in which Dateline played a part. Here's John Larson.
Action!
Patrol boat's coming!
Cut. Cut. Right away back. Wait till you hear patrol boat coming.
Jim Abrams made some of the most successful film comedies of the 1980s.
Okay, let's print that. We'll do one more like that.
His movies include Airplane, Naked Gun, and Hot Shots. But the fun stopped for Jim Abrams 9 years ago. He was finishing his latest movie when suddenly his one-year-old son Charlie began having unexplained seizures.
On his first birthday, I was pushing him in a swing out in the front yard, and I noticed his head kind of went like that, and he threw his arm up in the air.
Jim and his wife Nancy took Charlie to a neurologist who did a series of tests on Charlie's brain. The tests confirmed the doctor's suspicion. Little Charlie had epilepsy.
Okay, Charlie. Okay.
But nothing prepared the Abrams for the nightmare to come. Charlie began having many more seizures.
Wow, seizure.
Sometimes he'd have 100 seizures a day.
Another seizure.
Sometimes Charlie would just go limp.
Okay, that was a drop seizure.
Other times he'd shake.
He's stiff as a board right now.
The worst kind of seizure.
Charlie. Charlie.
The Abrams brought Charlie to Dr. Donald Shields, a nationally recognized expert at UCLA, who tried to control Charlie's seizures with anticonvulsant drugs.
And then we lost control and just nothing was working. I think he probably had all of the available medications, and we were starting to look at some of the more experimental kinds of medications.
Even worse, Jim Abrams says the drugs had a terrible side effect. They were turning his son into a zombie.
You pour the drugs down the child's throat, your child's throat, despite the fact there's something inside you that says, wait a minute, this can't be right. You know, Charlie was so loaded. At times he just lived in a car seat. He was so blotto from these drugs that he was essentially non-functional.
This little girl is about to have a bad epileptic seizure.
Half an hour. Here she goes.
Now, while you're watching this, consider this. New miracle drugs control these terrible seizures in most of the 750,000 children in this country who suffer from epilepsy. But for this girl, and for 150,000 kids like her, drugs simply don't work. The Abrams feared Charlie was one of these most unfortunate children.
After the first drug, then there is only a 10 to 15% chance that the second drug will work, regardless of what that drug is. And the percentages drop from there.
Even more frightening, if left unchecked, these seizures can damage their brains, retarding these children forever. So the Abrams were racing against the clock. They had to stop Charlie's seizures before it was too late. They allowed doctors to operate on Charlie's brain, but the seizures continued. They even tried a faith healer, but that didn't work either.
This house was filled with tears. All of us, all the time, cried. I mean, Charlie's brother and sister literally, for months, cried themselves to sleep at the foot of his crib because they just had some sort of instinct that they wanted to be near him.
His son was slipping away. His whole family was in anguish, and the doctors had no answers. Jim Abrams was desperate. He decided to start his own study of epilepsy. He attended medical lectures and read every book he could find on epilepsy treatment. And one day in a medical library, he found something no one had told him about. A book describing a diet that supposedly cured half of the epileptic kids who went on it.
And it was like dumbfounding to him. How could that possibly be?
The book claimed that experts here in Baltimore were perfecting something called the ketogenic diet,
A diet consisting largely of something most doctors tell us to avoid: generous helpings of fat. Against his own doctor's advice, Jim brought Charlie to Johns Hopkins Children's Center, where he found the man who wrote the book, Dr. John Freeman. There, they also met a 72-year-old dietitian, Millicent Kelly, who had been working with the diet for 40 years.
So this is the one to use, even though this has a much better flavor.
Now retired and a part-time consultant, Millie had designed meals that gave kids just enough protein to grow on, combined with lots of fat, bacon, butter, and heavy whipping cream. The families have to measure every bite of every meal precisely, or else Millie says the diet won't work.
Whatever happens there to cause that seizure just doesn't happen anymore.
Okay.
And they become seizure-free, and that's a remarkable thing.
Bobby.
Finally, it was Charlie's turn to try Millie's diet. He was taken off all medications and fed mostly fats. His father says it was a miracle.
His seizures started to diminish immediately. I mean, it was pretty dramatic. You could hold him and you could kind of feel him be less intense. And within a couple of days, he stopped having seizures completely.
Sometimes there is truth in the old ways, even if we don't understand them.
Dr. John Freeman supervises the keto diet at Johns Hopkins.
Do you fully understand how it works?
We have no clue how it works. And that's part of the reason it hasn't been accepted in lots of places.
Oh, look what she's
But consider the results. Most kids who try the diet at Hopkins can go back to normal food after 2 years, never need drugs again, and remain seizure-free.
If I see results like I've been seeing, there's so many encouraging words talking to other parents that have been on the diet, and it works.
I'm coming to get you. I'm coming to get you.
Jim and Charlie returned to Los Angeles, where Charlie thrived.
I'm coming. Here I come. Here I come. I'm coming. I'm coming to get you. Here I come.
No longer a zombie on medications, the seizures were gone. But the story doesn't end there.
All of a sudden your eyes open up in the middle of the night and you say, wait a minute. You know, this didn't have to happen. 90% of these seizures didn't have to occur. Waking up around the clock and pouring drugs down his throat didn't have to occur.
Jim was angry and puzzled that none of the 6 doctors he went to for help ever mentioned the diet.
What has stopped Charlie's seizures has been in existence for 70 years. It's been sitting there. It was waiting for him.
You had some knowledge that this diet was probably working back at Johns Hopkins, and yet you dissuaded the Abrams from attempting it. How come?
Well, because I don't think we had exhausted all of the medical approaches yet. There were actually still other medications that we hadn't tried yet.
Dr. Freeman tells us that 50 to 70% of the patients that come through his doors and get put on the diet have success. Can you think of any drugs in these hard cases that have 50 to 70% success rates?
Probably not anything that comes up to that level.
So why are modern doctors ignoring this diet? Charlie's own doctor has a surprising answer.
There's no big drug company behind a ketogenic diet, and there probably can never be unless somebody starts marketing sausage and eggs with cream sauce on it as a drug.
You're saying that in a sense, one of the reasons that the ketogenic diet is not popular at this point is because there's not a big drug company behind it selling it to the doctors.
I think that's probably true. I hate to say that, but I think it's probably true.
It does not come in a pill form. It cannot be administered with a scalpel. And the only people who profit from the ketogenic diet are the patients.
When we left the Abrams family in 1994, Charlie was 2.5 years old, and the seizures had stopped. But as Jim would soon find out, Charlie's life, as well as his own, were about to change forever.
Getting the word out about Charlie's new diet makes a difference for thousands of children and sends Jim Abraham's career in a whole new direction.
I actually got to call her up one day and say Meryl Streep was playing you, and we made a movie about the ketogenic diet.
Charlie's father starts a crusade.